Villain Theory here, and today we are ranking the expansions. Rather than go through them card by card, which I think would take a long time, there's a lot of expansions now, I'm going to focus on the best and worst parts of each box. Now, for the purpose of ranking them, which will be done fully at the end, I have taken every single thing into account. I've been through all these boxes, every single card, and obviously I've been playing them for years, so that's kind of how I'm structuring this. Also, a quick heads up, a couple of videos ago, I said I had a couple of really special videos coming up next. This is going to be a good video, but this is not one of those, super special videos. That will be coming up, the second one, on Sunday, so keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, let's get into it, starting with the best parts of Rise of Red Skull, the first expansion. And for me, the Red Skull and the Solo villains are all-time classics, still some of my favorite villains in the game. I really, really enjoy them. And Spider-Woman, one of the heroes in the box, I absolutely love as well. She is still to this day the only hero who can significantly invest in two different aspects. She can be, half justice, half aggression, or half justice, half protection. Mix them up in any way. All of them work really well. And she also has this interesting ability where by playing different aspect cards, you build up her stats and you can lean into that as well. I think it's really, really good. We also have some good aspect cards here. For Justice, we have Clear the Area, probably, maybe the most famous solo Justice card in the game. Skilled Investigator, just very, very good at any player count. If you're in multiplayer, it's not uncommon to just bring one of these for every single player. Then we've got Spider-Man Peter Parker, who is honestly pretty decent in solo play, absolutely absurdly good in 4-player. So whether you're playing solo Justice or big multiplayer Justice, there's something here for everyone. I think these are really, really good cards anyone is happy to have in their card collection. We then got Goliath and Team Training and Leadership, with Goliath being a good ally, really interesting with burst damage potential, which is a bit unusual. Allies are typically a bit more a steady drip of damage or thwarting. And Team Training is just generically useful. All your allies get an extra use is effectively what this says. To look at the worst parts of Rise of Red Skull, for me, part of that is Absorbing Man. Now, I like the idea here, but he only gets one kind of trait at a time usually. He kind of absorbs them from the environments that are in play. And what this really means in basic English is that you only have a small chance to have the right kind of trait on him to make the encounter card interesting. Otherwise, his encounter cards just aren't that interesting. I think he's a little bit plain. Sadly for me, one of the more boring scenarios in Marvel Champions. But, he is fine. There's not much, really bad about him. There's just not much interesting. I also then need to talk about the mod sets in Rise of Red Skull. Now, I don't dislike them per se, but there's just not very many of them. I think there's a total of about 4, where in some of the newer ones we're getting, 9, 10 plus. So you're just getting less mod sets compared to a normal expansion box these days. Other stuff just to mention, I do like Crossbones a lot. Taskmaster is still really solid. Hawkeye is, unfortunately, I think one of the most forgettable, kind of ignorable heroes in the game. If he wasn't in my collection, if I had never played Hawkeye, looking back, comparing my current experience, I don't think I would, feel like I had missed out a lot. But he is fun, he is solid, I do really enjoy him, especially his Vibranium and Explosive Arrows, so not bad, but just not really standing out here. Campaigns in Marvel Champions, which is interesting as we're talking about the campaign expansion boxes, are not really my thing. They weren't in the core set, and as we've heard in a recent sort of podcast episode I did where I got to interview one of the ex-lead designers, they weren't ever intended to actually be in the game in the first place. But some people love these campaigns, and I think that's totally fair. For me, not such a big fan, and I should say, it's probably a good time to say it, this is all just my opinion, my personal opinion here. I'm not trying to score points by saying the popular opinion, so on and so forth. I'm just not a campaign person. And for me, what I actually like about this campaign in Rise of Red Skull is it's not very intrusive, and it kind of just has things which can amplify or help your hero do what it already wants to do. So the mechanics aren't intrusive, and the rewards kind of synergistic, and I actually like that. So sometimes less is more. So does Rise of Red Skull have the most basic plain campaign of all the boxes? Yes. But does it have what is probably my second favorite campaign of all the boxes? Also yes. If somebody asked me to play through the Rise of Red Skull campaign, I'd actually be quite happy and interested, whereas most campaigns in this game, I'd probably be like, can we just play it without the campaign mechanics? Over in Galaxy's Most Wanted, we've got Rocket Raccoon probably being my favorite part of this box. He's a very interesting hero. I didn't used to originally like him. I've got into him a lot more over time, and I think he's aged really well with all the different tech cards. We've got all different things that kind of help us to defeat minions, summon enemies, because he loves defeating enemies, and he's got all these kind of interesting kind of tech synergy and things he can do with that. So really interesting hero here. Drang I really like as a villain, very minion heavy with his typical recommended mod set, but you can swap that out, and he's kind of a very blank canvas, but he still has the interesting kind of Badoon ship charge up mechanic. He has lots of challenging side schemes if you want something to challenge you kind of in threat in some ways, particularly in multiplayer. It's in solo the Milano, his whole thing, but it makes it a little easier there. And then we've got the mod set. So I've represented this with the Star Shark card from Menagerie Medley, and Space Shark I think really summarizes the amount of awesome in this box in terms of modular sets, but really this represents all the modular sets in the box for me. This is why it's here. I love the modulars. This has some of the strongest modular sets in the entire game. Almost all of them are just exceptional. People don't typically like the Space Pirates mod set, but I started playing around Galaxy's Most Wanted. I, was maybe more used to other games where you weren't guaranteed to have all your cards all the time, which is what Space Pirates can kind of deny you. So I ended up kind of liking Space Pirates. I wasn't, that offended by them, and I do think the usual place you find them in the Nebula scenario is just particularly bad. I think it makes the Nebula scenario even more annoying. So take the Space Pirates out of there. I actually think it's a pretty good mod set still, but every other mod set is just amazing, especially Menagerie Medley and Band of Badoon. The aspect cards in Galaxy's Most Wanted are pretty decent. Hand Cannon, I think, is almost an essential kind of component for aggression. Not for every build, but for anyone who wants to use their basic attack, I really like it. Death Focus is a classic. There's a lot of heroes with superpowers in a superhero card game. Then in Protection, I think Hard to Ignore is a staple for the defensive builds. I don't know why this hasn't been reprinted before. Desperate Defense is available elsewhere, I think in a couple of packs. But it's so good in a world where packs and expansions are going out of print. Rise of Red Skull, I probably should have mentioned, a little bit hard to get hold of these days, to say the least. And a couple of other expansions are going the same way. Desperate Defense being here is really good. If you don't have it, great defense card. Probably my favorite defense event. And then Starhawk is not just a really solid ally in general, he's a really good resource sink because you can keep returning him to your hand, paying for him again. If you have too many resources, or your hand doesn't work out quite right, or you need an extra card in your hand to pay for something else, very flexible design, works really well, not to be underestimated. The worst parts, unfortunately, for Galaxy's Most Wanted, I think, are most of the villains. Ronan, I think, does see a decent amount of play, but mostly because he's regarded as the hardest villain in the game. I think aside from just having difficulty, he's very uninteresting, not really much going on except just stuff to hurt you. And I think difficulty is something that's very easy to add to the game, especially these days we've got more modular sets and different tools to do so. I think a scenario which is just plain difficulty and not much interesting doesn't add a lot. Nebula is a little bit frustrating, particularly on expert mode, just can kind of surge out of control randomly, or you get lucky, not much happens, and you can win pretty quickly, so it's a bit weird. Then Collector 1, also known as Infiltrate the Museum, the scenario's proper name. I absolutely loathe this scenario. People on my channel who've watched a lot of my videos know this about me. I just do not like this scenario. It basically takes your cards away and makes you pay to try and get them back. And if you don't pay to get stuff back, including his own cards, which he captures weirdly, if he captures too much stuff in his collection, you just lose. So you have to start paying to not only remove your own cards, but help him remove his own cards. It just, you end up paying so many resources. It just detracts a lot, I think, from playing the game, being an awesome superhero, which is the strongest part of this game for me. The last part I want to mention is the campaign, which is quite punishing, particularly at the later stages, particularly on Expert. I don't think for 1 second the designers tested Krieg Supremacy in the final scenario with all those negative icons, with 11 threat in solo play at all. I know a lot of changes were made to this expansion at the last minute, and that is a bit unfortunate that maybe this wasn't one of the best decisions, but it's just, I cannot endorse this in any way. Beyond that, we've got Groot as a hero who I think is very fun. I think Colossus does a lot of what he does, but maybe slightly more interesting. They are very different heroes though, and I do still really like Groot. The second Collector scenario I think has a bad name just because people are scarred by Collector 1, but actually like the scenario, I think it's pretty decent. And although the campaign is overly punishing and I really don't want to play it again, it does have this really fun market mechanic where victory kind of points in the victory display end up becoming units which you can then spend to get cool upgrades on the board. I actually love those cards and love that mechanic and think it's really interesting. I really hope they revisit something like this. Next up is Mad Titan's Shadow, and this is a weird box because I don't think the highs are that high, but I don't think the lows are that low, if that makes sense. I think everything is just pretty solid here. One of my favorite parts is the Infinity Gauntlet, which is a mod set with a permanent and setup card. So it's a card which is always in play. It starts in play turn 1, and it affects the game. It gives the villain plus stats, and then these Infinity Stone effects keep going off. Now, these effects are typically like stuns or healing the villain, things like that. Things that are kind of slowing you down, and the stat boosts on the Gauntlet just make their activations more deadly. So for me, the ultimate place to actually use this as a modular set are weaker villains that are too quickly defeated or lack kind of the teeth to threaten you. I think this fixes both of those things really well. The scenarios are really weird because there's a couple I really like, but I don't really like them. I think Ebony Moore is probably my most played, particularly on Expert, but he's still good in standard play. He just tends to fall over quite quickly. Whereas on Expert, you start with double the spells out, and he has a pretty hefty HP bonus. But I do like the kind of random magic effects, and you can kind of see the spells ticking down over time as he's kind of like casting them at you, and it gives you time to react and play around them a bit. Then we've got the heroes, who I think both heroes are slightly an acquired taste. I think Spectrum takes quite a bit of practice to play at her best, especially with deck building considerations, but I absolutely love playing her. I think she's really, really fun. Adam Warlock is extremely weird. He can take cards from every aspect, but it must be an equal amount, and only one of each card. So you end up having a deck full of very, very different cards. But now that we have the pull aspect, you basically choose 4 aspects out of 5 aspects. I think that's really interesting. And there are things he can do within one deck that nobody else can. And I think his decks have a lot of replayability. You know, if you build a deck for him, you can play it 3 times and have 3 very different experiences. Just because you've only got one of each card, the way things fall and line up is going to be very, very different. So I like him a lot. In terms of the aspect cards, I think the allies are pretty good here. But, you know, they're not mandatory, but I do enjoy having them. 1-cost allies is very unique in Blade. Callow Finding Events is very kind of cool for leadership. I like that. Ready to Rumble is nice to have for any form-changing characters. And Band Together is a very interesting interactive resource card, which is terrible if you don't have allies out. But if you do have a couple of allies out, basically becomes one of the best resource cards in the game. I think it's very interesting. What is notable here is that all of these are part of Spectrum's pre-con deck that she comes with, and not Adam's deck. Now, the worst parts for me are going to be the Loki scenario, which is just very long, very annoying. I think Loki's are meant to be annoying, but I think they succeeded too well as I'd just rather play a scenario which isn't actively, like, annoying me, if that makes sense. And the second thing here is I don't like the cards that come with Adam Warlock's pre-con deck. The Cosmic Entity cards were a big miss, but there's also just a lot of reprints. We got another Heroic Intuition, another For Justice, another Combat Training. You know, cards we just got in the core set already, just coming again with him, which is a little bit weird, not adding a ton of value. I don't know if there's a lot else I want to mention for Mad Titan's Shadow. There's a lot I could mention being, yeah, pretty good, but it's not amazing. And there's a few things maybe I'm not so keen on, but it's not terrible. But I do quite like the campaign here. I think next to Rise of Red Scott, it's the least intrusive. I quite like, you know, the rewards you get from that. There's also some interesting mod sets here, which while don't hit anywhere near the highs of Galaxy's Most Wanted overall, stuff like the Frost Giants I really like. Armies of Titan, you know, the Children of Thanos and Black Order mod sets, all pretty decent. Up next is Sinister Motives, and I love the villains from this box, particularly these 3 on the screen, Sandman, Venom, and Mysterio. All very interesting, very different, very creative, and very thematic. So those are huge wins. We've then got a lot of good mod sets in here. We've got some that play with your obligations, Nemesis sets, Alter Ego, even Acceleration tokens, which is kind of interesting. We've also got the Sinister Assault mod set, which isn't recommended in any scenario. It's kind of parts of it are used in the campaign, but you should totally use this as a mod set wherever you like. It can be a bit challenging, but you get 6 really interesting minions, which all have 3 boost icons, which is very scary, but very, you know, impactful, and that's really fun. Oh, not to mention the Symbiotic Strength mod set, so you can give any villain effectively some kind of symbiote suit, you know, abilities. I think that's really fun, and it has a lot of varied effects. It's a very interesting mod set. So the mod sets here for me are a huge win, almost up to the level of Galaxy's Most Wanted, and the villains here are very, very fun. The aspect cards are pretty fun here as well. I really like that the whole shield archetype for Justice kind of comes in this box. You can run a whole new type of Justice deck with just the cards here, and it feels basically complete, but you can also kind of mix and match. You can run a Global Logistics deck, you can run a Homeland Intervention deck, or you can just go all into shield if that's what you want to do. I also really love What Doesn't Kill Me for protection. For me, this is kind of a staple. It's crazy they haven't reprinted it since then. I think this is one that needs to be kind of out there and particularly available, as Sinister Motives has become hard to find. I love this card for readying in protection. Doesn't matter if you have aerial or if you have a high basic attack stat, you know, like either Vigilant or Leading Blow. Some of the other ways to kind of effectively ready in protection. All you need is a physical resource and boom, you can ready up. So good for characters that want to use their hero's basic attack or thwart repeatedly. Unfortunately for me, while I do like the villains from this box, Venom Goblin is very flawed, particularly on Expert, particularly with his recommended mod set, Goblin Gear, because the Advanced Glider is very punishing, but in general, I think he just throws in counter cards at you. I think it's a little bit wonky. I do think it's a lot more interesting than, say, Ronan, so part of me does like Venom Goblin, but it depends on the day. And to add on to this, at the end of Sinister Motives campaign, which I otherwise quite like, when you get to Venom Goblin, if you've done too well, you are punished very severely. So in that regard, I do not like it. The symbiote suit otherwise, you know, outside of the campaign thing, and that you get an extra encounter card outside of it as well against Venom Goblin, which is crazy. I like the symbiote suit. I think it's one of the more fun basic upgrades we have in the entire game. Very cool. Now, the other bits I need to mention here, are the heroes, Ghost Spider and Spider-Man. Ghost Spider, I know, is a fan favorite, so chances are, if you're watching this wondering what expansion to get, should I try and hunt down one of these elusive copies of Sinister Motives? People love Ghost Spider. Me personally, I think she has very high highs but very low lows, both in power but also fun for me. So I enjoy her, but she's not an essential for me in terms of the way that, Spider-Woman or maybe Rocket is. Same for Spider-Man Miles Morales, who I think is, very solidly fun, but isn't particularly unique. The only other thing I particularly want to mention here is that if you like the Web Warrior kind of Spider-Man, Spider-Verse kind of theme in general, this is the box for you. I think that elevates it significantly if you're a fan of that. I've not spoken about thematics much here, but I think the thematics here for liking Spider-Man stuff is even better than, let's just say you're a, Captain America vs. Hydra fan, Rise of Red Skull. I think this is just particularly good for Spider stuff. Next up, we have the Mutants entering Marvel Champions with Mutant Genesis. I love both of these heroes. Now, you might need to look up videos or Reddit posts or something about how the heck these characters work within the rules, because there's some weird timing and different things like that. But outside of that, the way they actually play is really, really fun and engaging. Shadowcat and Colossus, both pretty tanky characters in different ways. And then we've got Magneto, who's probably my second or third favorite villain in the entire game, which is very high praise. I really love him. He's probably my villain I've played the most, and this is despite him coming out, halfway through the game's life or something. I really, really like Magneto. I think he's very fun. The only thing is his difficulty is quite high, not quite as high as Ronin or Venom Goblins, but for a lot of people it might be too high. Unfortunately, the aspect cards here are very restricted to the X-Men, and something I haven't said so far, but if something is restricted to a certain group of heroes, I don't rate it as highly. That's why you've not been seeing a lot of stuff, because Mad Titan's Shadow comes with a lot of great Avengers stuff, but you can't use it on Guardians, Champions, Web Warriors, X-Men, X-Force, S.H.I.E.L.D. And there's nothing wrong with those cards, but definitely something that I can use on any character is more valuable. That's why Professor X is so good. Yeah, if he raises an X-Men character, that's an extra thing he can do, and you do need an X-Men character on the board in addition to him for that effect. But he can also just stun a minion, or better yet, confuse a villain. Professor X is kind of the ultimate solo ally, so if you play solo and you want to power up some of your decks, he's going to be a really good option for that. The only downside is he's so good, you might take him in almost all your solo decks, and it might get a bit repetitive, but he is really, really good. Wolverine is a really interesting aggression ally. I love the way they made him, and again, ready to rumble. It's in a previous expansion, since things are going out of print and so on and so forth. If you don't have it, this is a good way to get it. The worst parts for me are basically the Sabretooth scenario. I think it's very annoying. The recommended mod set of Mystique is very annoying, but it is recommended. You don't have to have Mystique in the scenario. But just be warned, she's probably one of my least liked mod sets in the game. And then there's Master Mode, which is the third scenario, which has this mandatory Magneto ally. And something people who regularly watch my channel will know is I don't like mandatory allies. I just think this really is a bit wonky in the Master Mode scenario. There's actually quite a lot of other stuff to mention in Mutant Genesis, because there's a few things which are, maybe average, which aren't really worth celebrating, but aren't gonna, I'm not gonna talk it down or anything. So there's a lot of stuff that's just fine in the box to me. I kind of think Mansion Attack is fun. Again, Project Wide Awake almost ended up in the worst category for me. It's very thematic. This box is very thematic, which is not something I'm particularly scoring too much, but just like the Web Warrior Sinister Motives box being good for fans of that. If you're a fan of mutant stuff in the comics, TV shows, movies, this is probably going to be the most thematic box to tie in with that. The mod sets in this box don't blow me away, but I do really like Acolytes and the Future Past mod set. And the campaign here is, it's not bad, but it's not great. Just something to be aware of. At least that's how I feel. On next to Next Evolution, and I absolutely love the Cable here. I think he's super dynamic. He interacts with player side schemes, which is a new kind of thing that was introduced in this expansion. More on that shortly. I love the On the Run scenario. I think it's very replayable with a whole bunch of different potential villains. And I actually love the campaign in this box. Typically me, who loves standalone mode, the Next Evolution campaign, I think for me, hands down in hindsight, easily the best campaign in any of the boxes. So I'm actually quite excited if anyone were to ask me to play that again. I would be totally up for it. In fact, I might almost be inclined to suggest it, which is almost unheard of for me. And the last image here is Telepathy. It is a mod set, which is, again, set up and permanent, which is something I haven't mentioned since the Infinity Gauntlet. There are 3 mod sets in this box like that, which just alter up the villain stats and give them different keywords and things from turn 1, which I love. I also love the Black Tom Cassidy mod set. Very, very fun. The other mod sets maybe don't hit quite as high for me, but they're not bad. But the good ones are absolutely amazing, particularly the 3 super penetrated ones like telepathy. Then we've got flight and super strength. Just absolutely love these for altering the difficulty of scenarios. I really enjoy them. Then we've got the aspect cards, and Overwatch and Even the Odds are reprints, but considering things are going out of print, this is a really good way to get them. These are basically going to be your key cards in big multiplayer, 3 and 4 player, to really clear a lot of threat. So it kind of equips you for multiplayer justice in a way that the core set doesn't. That is ultra valuable. Deadpool as a basic ally, I think he's one of the most flexible allies in the game, and I think that's kind of underrated. You know, if you have a small collection, he's just really good. You can put him in almost any deck, but even with a full collection, I still sometimes use him, especially as a very easily sort of includable wild resource that can be particularly good for some characters. Digging Deep is a bit more niche. It doesn't suit every character amazingly, but there is quite a good amount that it does. It's a very fun kind of mechanic to get rewarded after it's discarded. So I really like the introduction of that. That's something new that we hadn't seen before Next Evolution in the game. But Next Evolution also introduces player side schemes, as I kind of mentioned. This new type of card where you play it and oh no, there's threat, something bad to remove, but you clear it and you get rewarded. These are game changers. These are absolutely fantastic. I love these. So this expansion gets a huge boost just because of their introduction to Marvel Champions. The worst parts for me are that 3 of the 5 scenarios include Hope Summers, and one of them has the Morlock allies. I don't like scenario sort of mandatory allies sort of forced on me. You guys are starting to get that impression now, I expect. I don't hate either of these, but the fact that she, Hope Summers is in 3 of the 5 scenarios, she kind of duplicates stats. So depending on the stats of your character, the effects can be very wonky. Doesn't scale up super well into multiplayer. It's just a little bit strange to me. So I actually love the mod set of Hope Summers. You can include it in any kind of scenario outside of this. It's kind of also another setup kind of modular that changes things from turn 1. I really like the modular. Don't like that it's forced in 3 scenarios. Beyond that, I quite like the Domino hero. I know this is kind of a fan favorite, although I think after the initial hype, things have died down a bit. But people still really like Domino. I quite like her. Juggernaut, Mr. Sinister, and Strife are the 3 scenarios which use Hope Summers, and I quite like all of those scenarios, but they are just not quite hitting the high enough heights for me to include in the best stuff. A bit like Mad Titan's Shadow, I think this box has quite a few things which are kind of average, and they're fine, I like them, but it does have a lot of really good stuff as well here. Next up is Age of Apocalypse, and if you've seen my podcast episode on this with Nelson, we did an extra long special, both reviewing it together. There's going to be a few best parts here, to say the least. Ensabana, the second Apocalypse fight, probably my favorite scenario in the entire game. I absolutely love it. Super incredibly fun. Bishop and Magic, both super interesting heroes. Bishop is really dynamic how he works with resources. Magic, you get to play with the top card of your deck face up. I think that's so interesting to engage with that. Also having the Mystic and X-Men trait, it's a really interesting combination for Magic. But I also still like the other scenarios. We've got 4 Horsemen, my favorite multi-villain scenario in the game. I really like the first time you fight Apocalypse. It feels like a better version of the Hela scenario from Mad Titan's Shadow to me. And I really like Dark Beast. It's just a solid kind of all-round scenario I'm happy to play any time. Really fun stuff. I felt like these added a lot to my collection when I got them as villains, and I've gone back to them frequently. I also really like the mod sets. There's a bunch of setup mod sets, a couple of permanent, things that affect the game from turn 1. And for me, that is huge value, just changing up a scenario from the get-go, really altering the experience in interesting different ways. And Age of Apocalypse also comes with standard free. So you've got the standard set, which you include in basically every scenario in Marvel Champions, except Wrecking Crew. It's got, Shadow of the Past, Assault, Advance, so on and so forth. You can replace it with standard free. It's technically a standard 2, but we don't talk about that much. That's from a different product. It has some value, but let's just stick with standard free here, which really alters the way your Nemesis, Minion, and Encounter set enters the game. I think it's extremely valuable. I really enjoy using it, and I highly recommend it. I use it about 50% of the time these days, and something I use in 50% of my games is just such incredible value. It just really, on top of all the other best parts I've already talked about, really lifts this box up for me. I think it's really high value. Oh, and then we've got all the aspect cards. The leadership cards here are so good. Team Training is a reprint, but if you haven't got it from elsewhere, that's really useful. X23 and Gold Balls, leadership and aggression ally respectively. Very high damage, very useful, make it into a lot of my decks these days. Then you've got Suit Up, which is a leadership event which lets you find allies from your deck or discard pile, along with attachment. Very powerful kind of way to just find an ally when you need it. Then you've got the whole Sidekick and Side-by-Side package. Sidekick turns a signature ally into a Sidekick ally, which lets you use a special team-up card with your signature ally. Side-by-Side, which readies both you and your ally. It's cool to kind of team up with your signature ally in a more significant way. It even has choices between getting, healing or bonus stats, which gives you interesting interaction at an extra level. So that is super, super fun. And Clobber, while it's a reprint from Gamora's pack, not only is it out of print, but I think it adds less value in terms of aspect cards than a lot of other hero packs. So while I do like the Gamora hero, it's not a high priority in terms of buying, in my opinion. So getting Clobber from a different source, which is one of my most used aggression events, I think that's really, really valuable here. Now, the big downside for Age of Apocalypse is the campaign. I'm really sorry to Caleb. He came on the podcast, he talked about it. But there's these side schemes which are kind of separate from the game. You have to interact with them very weirdly by throwing allies over there, then hoping you get lucky discarding stuff from your deck to activate them. It's all very strange. The grey cards you see on the screen, it's two sides of the same card really, but there's so many different rules and steps to this. It just feels like this whole separate, complicated kind of minigame on top of my game of Marvel Champions, when I'd really just be playing Marvel Champions if I wanted this weird separate game that I didn't really like that much. I probably wouldn't play it, but I don't want it on top of the game I do enjoy, if that makes sense. So, sorry, Caleb, but this one just didn't land very well for me. There's not a lot of other stuff to talk about because I've really talked about most of it under the best parts because I absolutely love everything in this box, really. Unis is the only other thing here. He's the first villain in the box. I don't dislike him, but he's just, he's decent, he's solid, but doesn't reach the heights of the rest of the box to see anything to say here. Next up is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I absolutely love the Nick Fury hero that comes in this box. He is fantastic. I also really like the Black Widow scenario that comes in this box, the first villain, but really, really engaging. My other favorite part of this box are the Thunderbolt minion modular sets, which are basically these super huge, tough minions, which almost act like a second villain, but once you defeat them, they go to the victory display. So it's kind of this additional villain you only have to defeat once. It's really interesting to add these into scenarios. They are intended for the Thunderbolt scenario, but I much prefer to use them in regular scenarios, perhaps scenarios that are a little bit too easy for my taste otherwise, that these can help increase, because there are 3 chances per passive encounter deck for them to enter play. Pretty reliable that you're going to get them. The aspect cards are kind of interesting here. I don't think there are any real huge game changers, but there's a lot of useful stuff, especially if you've got a small collection. There's a couple of basic allies and things which are just very usable. If you haven't got Command Team from a different pack, I think they come with War Machine, which is very hard to get hold of at the moment. That's really good. And this event comes with 4, which again, you might already have, but it's out of print. So if you don't, it's great to get another copy here. Global Logistics is a card we already talked about with Sinister Motives, but that's pretty hard to get hold of. So this is another good way to get that as well. But if you already have everything else in the game, I don't think you're going to get any significant game changes here. The biggest one for me probably is Nick Fury Sr., which is a really, really good way to remove threat in like solo, maybe in something like Aggression, which lacks threat removal, and just a pretty good ally overall. The worst parts for me are going to look a little bit like Galaxy's Most Wanted in terms of there are multiple villains I'm not very keen on. MODOK's just a little bit annoying and weird. Thunderbolts, a lot of people like this. People will give me a lot of flack for this, but again, I'm not trying to just say the popular opinions in my ranking just so people like the ranking. This is what I feel, and I don't like the Thunderbolts. I said in my video with Andy that I preferred it in multiplayer, and I think it gained a lot there, which I still think is true, but I have played it in, above 2 players since then, and it's not doing a ton for me. Something that Nelson said to me recently in our podcast, which is not quite out yet, transitioning it from my channel to his channel, small delay. But a small spoiler, what he said to me is he initially said he really liked the Thunderbolt scenario, but what he realized was he really liked the Thunderbolt mod sets, but you can use those outside of the Thunderbolt scenario. The actual Citizen V, whole Thunderbolt scenario itself, not as keen on, and that's kind of how I feel. But also, a lot of people in the comments for the last time I talked about this in the big Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. video I did, a few people in the comments were playing it incorrectly, where you keep swapping the Thunderbolts around when you don't need to, and I kind of agree. If you do swap them more often, it is more interesting, but not technically something you actually have to do in the rules, depending on if any of them have damage or not, etc., etc. So yeah, sorry guys, I know there's a lot of fans of Thunderbolts, but for me, the movie is better than the scenario. Then we've got Baron Zemo, who is full of good ideas, and this whole expansion, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., full of good ideas, some of the most interesting encounter cards in the game. Some of them are found in Baron Zemo, but the overall package I just think is a bit annoying and weird and wonky, and just doesn't do it for me. You have to do so much setup. You basically have to do the entire campaign setup to play Baron Zemo in standalone mode, which is a little bit weird. There's a lot to track with that. But then we can look at the campaign stuff, which I actually don't love either. There's a lot of really cool ideas. It's kind of like a clue. It's kind of like investigating who's the mole. But a lot of that is driven by having these 3 environments out every single scenario throughout the campaign. And you just have to throw money at them to keep the counters low. And yeah, they do something when you throw the resources at them to keep the secret counters down so they don't betray you, etc. It's a whole thing. But every couple of resources I'm throwing at them, I'm not throwing onto playing my hero cards to make my superhero do their superhero thing and engage with the game on a deeper level. And on expert mode, it's just a little bit twitchy, and it's fine. You know, I played the expert campaign and beat it first try, but I did custom build decks for the powerful heroes that come in the box. I just don't really enjoy this environment. You know, to speak about expert, this is what I have in general that I'm trying to put out there. A lot of the time, what I've complained about difficulty things in the past, people have been like, if you don't want it to be difficult, don't play on expert. My argument to that is there are fun ways to increase difficulty and not fun ways to increase difficulty. And if something is not fun where it could have been fun, that is where the problem is. It's not the difficulty and chance of losing, it's the way that it's added that I just don't like in some cases. Now, the rest of the stuff I just want to talk about in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to be Maria Hill, who's really weird. Some people are absolutely going to love her, new favorite hero. Some people are going to despise her, least favorite hero. Such a weird character. I like parts of her, and I don't like parts of her, which gives me this very weird divided opinion on her. Effectively, you play tons of shield supports and you move counters around to make all of them do all these different things. It feels a little bit more like a spreadsheet-oriented puzzle, a kind of a logic numbers moving around puzzle, than playing a dynamic hero in a fast-paced card game, which Marvel Champions otherwise is to me. So Maria's a bit of a weird one. I think if you like to build up the board and that's really your thing, maybe you don't like the difficulty too high, etc., you're going to enjoy Maria. But if you like the tension in a scenario and you like kind of the fast-paced back and forth, I don't think Maria is going to do it for you in any dynamic sense. But Truck is a good scenario, but doesn't blow my mind, but I do quite enjoy it. I like the stealth theme, I think that's very fun. And I just want to shout out the mod sets in this box. Love the Thunderbolt mod sets, but the more conventional mod sets, I think, have tons of interesting ideas in them. They're all very interesting, but they're a little bit safe in terms of the numbers and the effect on the game. Hopefully that makes sense. So if I were not to have those mod sets, you know, I would rather have them than not have them, but I don't think I would miss them. So that concludes my overall talk through of the boxes and what I like, what I don't like as much, and a few other factors. But I'm going to kind of try and rank all the boxes with all these parts against each other now, using a kind of cobbled together grid, a little bit like this. So I'm going to be using this to go through the villains, mod sets, aspect cards, campaigns, heroes, not in that order, and then kind of combine the results, giving the villains the biggest kind of percentage of influence because there are 5 in the box. I think that's the main thing you gain, followed by the heroes, followed by the aspect cards, followed by the mod sets, followed by the campaigns. And that's the kind of order I think of value these things add to the game. And again, while I haven't covered every single thing in the boxes from what I've talked through so far in this video, I have in terms of ranking them this way. I've done a lot of work on this, combined all these different things, had my own little crazy system. Just want you guys to know if I haven't mentioned something, it has been taken into account. I have played these for years and gone through everything card by card. So first up, we have the villains. And unfortunately for me, I like the ones the least in Galaxy's Most Wanted. Drang and Collector 2 do quite like. I actually have some fun against Nebula sometimes, but they're just very, very flawed. It is hard to recommend as an overall package. Followed by Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Again, there are 3 villains I'm not that keen on fighting, 2 in particular, and while there are a couple I like here, same with Galaxy's Most Wanted, they're not like topping my list of the most amazing villains in the game. And lastly on this tier, we have Mutant Genesis, which again is a couple of scenarios I just really don't want to play very often. Another one, it's a little bit hit and miss. And the other expansions I want to put in the good tier are just a step above what Mutant Genesis offers. I will say, for extra context though, thematically, the Mutant Genesis villains are really, really good with like Sentinels, Sabretooth, you know, the Robert Kelly assassination storyline, Magneto, Asteroid M, thematically amazing, and there are a couple of standout scenarios in there. But it's tough competition because this is how good these expansions are. I do think all the expansions in Marvel Champions are good value for money. You do get a lot for what you pay, and I do enjoy them all overall. Next up, we have Next Evolution, which has villains that I do quite like, but none that like blow me away. None make my top 10, none make my bottom 10. So they are good, but just, you know, not great. Next up, we have Mad Titan's Shadow, which is very similar. You know, it does have the Loki scenario, which marks it down. But then I do like, you know, I really like Ebony more. I like Tower Defense. I've grown to like Thanos quite a lot. Hela is a fan favorite, which I don't love, but I don't dislike. I think it's quite interesting. So this and Next Evolution in terms of villains were quite close for me, but they are good. They are solid. I enjoy them. I think you will enjoy them if you haven't played them before, but the best is yet to come. In terms of great villains, we have Rise of Red Skull. Zola and Red Skull I just think are absolute classics. And then there's Crossbones, who I do quite enjoy a lot as well. Absorbing Man brings it down a bit. Taskmaster, don't think it's aged super well. But the high points of this box, of these villains, are really, really good, which goes to show how good the other expansions coming on the list here are, because we've then got Sinister Motives, which has 3 really amazing scenarios in my opinion. There's the Sinister 6 scenario, which I've not talked about in this video yet, which I do quite like a lot as well. I absolutely loved it when I first played it. It slowly I don't think it aged that well for me, so I'm not as keen to replay it as often as some of these other scenarios, but nonetheless, it's still really good. It's only one that I think slightly holds it back, but even then, I do quite like a lot of things about Venom Goblin, so Sinister Motives scoring really high for villains. Also, just extremely thematic as well. Up there with Mutant Genesis, I think, for most thematic villains for me. And finally, you guys already know it, Age of Apocalypse. I love all of these scenarios. Unis is fine, and all the other ones are just so good, and I want to play them all the time, to the point that I think, my partner, who I play with quite often, is a little bit sick of them, but I absolutely love them. I love N7 especially. Really strong showing here. Next up, we have mod sets, and we're going to start off with Rise of Red Skull. Now, I don't hate the mod sets here. I think experimental weapons isn't that interesting, but it is kind of just part of the crossbone scenario, and you can happen to use it elsewhere, so I don't really mark the expansion down for that. But the thing is, there's just hardly any mod sets in there. You're getting a very low quantity compared to all the other boxes, so I just cannot put it above them. Next, we have Mutant Genesis. I like the Acolyte. It's the first kind of teamwork keyword mod set in the game as well. Feature Pass, pretty fun, high difficulty mod set. But the other ones are just really thematic, but mechanically not that interesting to me. Next up, we have Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I absolutely love the Thunderbolt mod sets. Absolutely love the ideas in most of the normal mod sets, but otherwise the normal mod sets, if I didn't have them, I wouldn't miss them, and I think that makes it hard to move up over the other expansions in the game. Next up we have Mad Titan's Shadow, which I love the Infinity Gauntlet, I really like Frost Giants, and I quite like a few of the mod sets in there, but again, most of them, if I didn't have them, I wouldn't miss them kind of thing. So none of these expansions are really bad for mod sets, just a few that don't stand out as much. When we have 4 remaining expansions, which in my opinion do have mod sets which really stand out significantly. And for me, that's going to start with Sinister Motives, playing with the Obligations, Nemesis Stairs, Origo, all the stuff I talked about before, Symbiote stuff, the Sinister Assault set, really fun stuff to change up the game. I use those ones all the time still to this day, and it came out years ago. Next Evolution, I really loved the Flight, Super Strength, and Telepathy Superpower mod sets, normally part of the Mr. Sinister scenario. Take them out of there, and they're game-changing in terms of upping the difficulty. Very easy to throw in as an additional modular set in any scenario. They will hurt you, but I think that's kind of by design, and don't add them unless you want to up the difficulty, is my general opinion. And I really like Black Tom Cassidy as well. That's a mod set I want to use way too often, so that just kind of adds on to the rest. Now, there are a few in here which aren't that memorable to me, a little bit like what I was saying about some of the Mad Titan's Shadow, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff, Mutant Genesis stuff, but I think the highs here are higher than the highs in all of those other boxes I mentioned. So just on that added value, it really moves up a lot for me here. And then we have Galaxy's Most Wanted. Every mod set in here is just really unique and interesting to me. Really, really enjoy these. Some of the best minion mod sets in the game. Got some interesting victory kind of condition side scheme mod set. We've got, Galactic Artifacts, Kree Militants I haven't mentioned yet, but the danger they can add when attacking, and also just being kind of large, chunky minions. So interesting. I really like these mod sets so much. And they could only possibly be usurped, sort of surpassed, by Age of Apocalypse, which does have a couple of mod sets which aren't that interesting to me, mostly the Dark Riders one, but really it's all the mod sets with the setup keyword, changing the game from the beginning, just like Next Evolution, Super Strength, Flight, and Telepathy. Really, really high value. I love using those. They're always impactful, always change up the game. And in addition to that, I think Standard 3 is kind of a modular kind of thing to replace the standard set. I think that would come under this as well. And that just boosts us up significantly on top of everything else. Where I already think this would be in this tier, now it's at the top of this tier. The campaigns aren't my favorite part of the game, so for me, my personal ranking, I had to change the categories on the left from, instead of having amazing at the top, now it's great. Instead of having flawed at the bottom, it's very flawed. And I think Age of Apocalypse campaign, very, very flawed. I'm just not interested in playing it ever again. I think it's quite detrimental to the fun the scenarios otherwise provide. I'm so sorry, Caleb. And then we've got Galaxy's Most Wanted, which I just don't think was tested properly. It's way too punishing in places, despite the awesome market mechanic being really, really fun. Following on from that, we've got Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't like throwing resources at the officers. I don't like how kind of twitchy it can feel on Expert as well. Then we've got Sinister Motives, which is, I think, really fun throughout. I quite like it. Just the ending is a huge miss for me. You play the campaign, you get up to the big sort of finale, and when that is kind of a miss, that hurts it a lot. But otherwise, this would be, in my top category, I think, for campaigns. And then we've got Mutant Genesis, which is fine, but a little bit tedious. I feel like there's a lot of side scheme stuff going on. It just feels a little bit... I feel like it doesn't add on a lot compared to the next two campaigns I'm going to talk about, while making me do more setup. You've got these extra cards which are on the board, which sometimes they aren't that useful, but they are kind of nice to have. I don't know. It's just not a campaign that I'm super keen to replay. Then we've got Mad Titan's Shadow, which isn't super interesting, but it's not very intrusive, and I do quite like what it adds. I think some of the references like Shawarma are quite fun. And I think something I forgot to mention when talking about Mad Titan's Shadow is that the Loki scenario, I think, is at its most fun in campaign mode, where the campaign bonuses help you. You've got the allies, you've got the Norn Stones. So the campaign in Mad Titan's Shadow actually improves what I think is otherwise the worst part of the Mad Titan's Shadow box. Then we've got Rise of Red Skull. Very simple, very basic, but it works. It's got a couple of fun choices. Happy to play this, don't mind it whatsoever. Then, at the top, we've got Next Evolution, hands down my favorite. So most of the way campaigns work in Marvel Champions is, you play the scenarios in order, and hey, there's a side scheme which, when you defeat it, does something. Maybe if you don't defeat it, you get punished. The only one that really differs from that significantly is Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But what's nice about Next Evolution is you get to choose the side scheme, and each one corresponds to a specific reward. So you kind of choose what order you want to get the rewards, but also the rewards all kind of synergize with your deck. They kind of find you cards already in your deck, help you out in different ways like that. Kind of general rewards, which don't feel like they're twisting my deck into any weird directions. They're just letting my hero do more of their superhero thing, kind of in a way that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. making me pay out those resources, or Age of Apocalypse making me play those allies to different locations, doesn't. I'm doing separate things there or losing resources. Whereas Next Evolution, my hero gets to be more heroic. And for me, that is a huge win. Next up, we've got the heroes. And again, I changed the categories here because heroes are so fun in this game. I genuinely don't believe there's any I would mark lower than great, and some just go up to fantastic. Heroes are why we play Marvel Champions. So we're going to start off with Sinister Motives, which is going to surprise people. I'm sorry. Ghost Spider just doesn't quite do it for me like it seems to for a lot of people. Mars, a little bit plain. Like, over time, those heroes have lost more value for me than most heroes in the game. Just how I feel. Sorry, guys. Then we've got Galaxy's Most Wanted. I quite like Rocket, didn't originally. I quite like Groot, but don't as much as I used to. I don't know, but they are good. I want to stress that I'm just ranking them the lowest of stuff that is all really good. I do enjoy those characters significantly. One of my favorite decks in the game is a Rocket deck. So I like these, it's just I can't move them up over the competition because the competition is so strong. Next up, we've got Rise of Red Skull. Spider-Woman, absolutely fantastic. Hawkeye probably would be in the flawed category if I had one, if I was ranking the heroes separately. So it ends up kind of being in kind of a middle area here. And then we've got Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is very similar, where Maria Hill, don't know if I'd put her in flawed, maybe just good or something if the tier, continued down. But Nick Fury, absolutely love Nick Fury. So again, it kind of averages out the box. And then we've got Mad Titan's Shadow, which has two heroes which are slightly acquired taste, I think it's fair to say. But I quite like both of these. So, they're not fantastically blowing me away, my favorite heroes, but I do quite like both of them. So strong showings there. But now we get to talk about my favorite ones, and we're going to go to Next Evolution. I absolutely adore Cable, one of my favorite heroes in the game. Domino, I haven't liked as much as most people. Again, another fan favorite, a little bit like Ghost Spider. People seem to absolutely love Domino, but for me, never quite hit that point at the beginning, and definitely now I just don't feel that compelled to play her that much. But she is interesting. I do enjoy playing her. But then at the top here, we're going to have Mutant Genesis. I absolutely love Shadowcat and Colossus. And then in Age of Apocalypse, we have Bishop and Magic, who I absolutely love as well. So the three X-Men boxes end up for heroes being my top rated ones. I really like all of them. Bishop, just so kind of dynamic with the resources. Magic, looking at the top card of the deck. Shadowcat has some interesting form changing, kind of, demands of trying to attack, defend, timing, sequencing. Colossus has all sorts of sequencing and stuff with his tough cards. He's going to be a character that, the pre-con is terrible foil. If you play Colossus the first time, you might not like him. But Colossus, if you're using custom build decks, which you really need to for him, he's absolutely phenomenally fun, especially these days. All these new cards we're getting have just added to him so much. So the Mutant boxes have scored really well for heroes. Lastly, for this kind of ranking, we have aspect cards. We're going to start off with Mutant Genesis, just because most of them are X-Men specific, and even then, some of those I don't like too much. And we've got stuff like Gatekeeper, I'm just really very, 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 very rarely ever wanting to use. We've got Mad Titan's Shadow. I love Spectrum's precon. Adams, I think, is passable, unless you really like to play Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch a lot, and I guess nowadays Magic. Then we've got Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which again, if I didn't have it, I don't think I'd miss them, but it does have a few nice things, especially if you're starting off. A lot of the allies are very generally applicable. If you like Black Widow, again, Practice Plan, a little bit of niche good stuff as well here, but not stuff that I would miss significantly outside of one or two heroes. Then we have a lot of really, really good stuff. Rise of Red Skull has some really kind of core staple Justice cards, I would say, in addition to a couple of nice leadership cards, and if you like Avengers stuff for that as well. Also, something I haven't talked about for Rise of Red Skull in general, I think this goes for the aspect cards, but especially the villains, the heroes, they are not overly complicated, which makes them really good as a first expansion to get. The problem is, it's out of print and hard to get, sorry guys, but I wanted to mention that as kind of an additional upside that lives outside the categories I'm ranking stuff by. We then have Galaxy's Most Wanted, which has hand cannon and some really essential, I feel like, defense stuff, which is really, really nice to have. Death Focus as well. Used to be difficult to get, now it's in Magneto's pack, which I do recommend, but outside of that, and even having more copies if you like to keep multiple decks built is useful. But then the top 3 expansions, all significantly very good for me. We've got Age of Apocalypse, which has all those amazing leadership cards and a couple of really kind of what I would call, I think, staple aggression cards these days in Gold Balls and Clobber. Then we have Sinister Motives, where we get the whole new Justice archetype. We can do different things with all the shield stuff. I really like that. Now I can run Monica Chain and Surveillance Team, no other shield stuff, or I can go Global Logistics without Homeland Intervention, or vice versa, or combine all of these things. It's really, really fun. And what doesn't kill me is an absolutely game-changing protection card. And of course, then we've got Next Evolution. Just introducing player size schemes adds an incredible amount of value here. It's a whole different card type you cannot find in any other expansion. It's so, so good. There are some absolutely essential, amazing cards there. But also, if you like to thwart in multiplayer and you haven't bought the other hero packs where these reprinted cards come from, getting Overwatch and even the odds in here is such high value that I really, really like it. So overall, combining all these factors, prioritizing the villains, then heroes, then aspect cards, then mods, then campaigns in that order, we end up with Galaxy's Most Wanted and last. Again, it has some really strong points. I love Rocket, I love the mod sets. There's a couple of scenarios I do quite like, but there's too many lows. It has the lowest lows, and I think that has just dragged it down. But I still think I got my money's worth for this product by far, especially over time. It's been really good. Then, unfortunately, it's going to be Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I think if you guys saw my review, you guys probably saw this coming. Too many villains that I miss. One of the heroes doesn't really click with me overall. The aspect cards, nothing super essential. Outside of probably the Mutant Genesis adding a lot for X-Men, probably the most niche kind of stuff we've got. The campaigns for both of these as well also aren't great. Next up, we have Mutant Genesis, and I'm also just going to throw out there Mad Titan's Shadow and Rise of Red Skull, because all 3 of these for me scored really closely. They each have different strengths and weaknesses, but when you combined everything, I found it really hard to differentiate them. I did put, Rise of Red Skull at the top, Mutant Genesis at the bottom of this tier, but there wasn't a lot in it. Mutant Genesis has amazing heroes. Rise of Red Skull, I feel like, has already good villains. Mad Titan's Shadow doesn't have any high highs quite like those other boxes, in my opinion. Mutant Genesis also has Magneto, but Mad Titan's Shadow doesn't have as many lows either. That's low-key, and aside from that, I just feel like everything's pretty solid for me, in my personal opinion. Something I will say is that Mad Titan's Shadow scenarios tend to run on the longer side, so if you like these big, long, epic battles, that might be, might elevate it for you. But if you think that might drag on and be a bit tedious, particularly if you play 3 and 4 player where the games are longer anyway, it might be a bit detrimental to you, so your experience may vary. And in contrast, Rise of Red Skull has a couple of villains with quite low hit points, will typically go a lot faster, which may be good or not good for you, depending on your preference. But of my top 3 expansions in the game, we start with Sinister Motives. I absolutely love the villains. Venom Goblin scores a bit lower, but the other 4 are really good, particularly the first 3 in my opinion. I absolutely love the mod sets. I love the aspect cards. There's a lot of really good stuff going on here. If you like Web Warriors, it's really good. I don't dislike the heroes, I just think there's a lot of strong competition, so they're pretty nice to have as well. Honestly, just a really good box to have. Then it's going to be Next Evolution. Player side team is amazing, Cable amazing, Domino interesting. I don't dislike any of the scenarios, which is unusual because there's always one. I'm quite picky in general, but aspect cards, hero stuff, the mod sets, there's a couple of really, really, really good ones, and the best campaign. And we're ranking campaign expansions here, so in that regard, absolutely phenomenal. Really, really like it. And of course, you might have seen it topping quite a few of my categories or being in the top tier, as it were. We've got Age of Apocalypse. Love the villains, love the heroes, love the aspect cards, love the mod sets. Just the campaign is the only thing holding this back kind of from being like the ultimate expansion, in my opinion. But I absolutely like it. Something to keep in mind here, where Rise of Red Skull is kind of the simplest box, easiest, least complex. Next Evolution, actually, in terms of villain difficulty, is then the second easiest, in my opinion. But it has high complexity. Age of Apocalypse, by design, it is harder than average and a bit more complicated than average. So I wouldn't rush out to buy this first unless you absolutely love the Age of Apocalypse storyline. I'll probably try and start with a different expansion. But it's definitely one I think you really should make an effort to get, because, at least for me, I absolutely loved it. So that's my overall villain ranking. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video, which should be the more special kind of collaborative effort video, which I'm really hoping you guys would join in with. Also, as a quick note, I've seen that reveal week has started, which is awesome. We might have seen a special shield for maybe a winged hero coming up. I don't know. Maybe look into that. That's not mine to reveal. But there's a lot of cool stuff coming up, I'm sure. I'm not doing that anymore as I'm kind of winding the channel down, but I really look forward to seeing what everybody has to reveal. And yeah, see you guys next time.